There is a symbol so ancient, so quietly hidden inside the story of Jesus, that even most devoted believers have never been told what it truly means. Not because it was lost, but because if you understood what the cross of light really was, not the wooden cross of suffering, but the living, luminous cross that the Gnostics spoke of in hushed circles, you would never see your own body the same way again. You would understand that Jesus was not just a teacher of morality. He was a master of something far older. Stay with me, because what I am about to share with you was considered so dangerous that entire libraries were destroyed to keep it from reaching your ears. Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like there is something inside you, something ancient, that the world keeps telling you to ignore? That feeling has a name. The early Gnostics called it the divine spark, and they believed Jesus did not come to tell you about it from the outside. Before we go further, I want you to take a breath, because this is not a history lesson. This is a remembering, and if something in you is already stirring as I speak, that is not coincidence. That is recognition. Now let us go back, all the way back, to a time before Christianity had councils, before it had emperors, before it had stone cathedrals and gold thrones, to the 1st and 2nd centuries of the Common Era, when small communities of seekers gathered in silence, in homes, in caves, passing down something they called Gnosis, not belief, knowledge, direct, living, interior knowledge of the divine. And at the center of their most sacred teachings, there was a cross, but not the one you think. The text is called the Acts of John. It is one of the most extraordinary documents from the ancient world. It was not included in your Bible, and now you have to wonder why. In this text, on the night before the crucifixion, Jesus gathers his disciples not at a table but in a circle. They begin to move, they begin to dance, and as they move in that sacred circle, Jesus speaks to them about a mystery he calls the cross of light. He says, and these are words that scholars have wrestled with for centuries, that the cross of light is not made of wood. It is not the instrument of death you will see tomorrow. The cross of light, he tells them, is the divine principle that holds all things together. It is the vertical axis that connects the heavens above to the earth below. And it is the horizontal axis that moves through all living things, from center to circumference. It is the intersection of the eternal and the temporal. And it lives, he says. It lives inside the human body. Now, if you are someone who has spent time studying ancient wisdom traditions, you already feel where this is going. Because the ancients, from the Egyptians to the Vedic seers to the Zoroastrian mystics, all mapped a secret architecture within the human form. A system of inner channels, inner fire, inner light. The Gnostics called it pneuma, breath, spirit, living energy, and they taught something almost unbelievable, that this pneuma could be cultivated, refined, transformed, that the body was not a prison for the soul. The body was a laboratory, and Jesus, in their tradition, was the supreme alchemist of this inner science. Now I need you to stay with me here, because this is where the story gets extraordinary. And I want you to understand it clearly, because this is not mythology. This is ancient biological philosophy, dressed in sacred language. When the Gnostics spoke of ascension, they were not speaking only of what happens after death. They were speaking of what happens in the living body when consciousness begins to expand beyond the ordinary. They described specific experiences, warmth rising through the spine, light appearing behind closed eyes, a sensation of the self dissolving and expanding simultaneously as signs that the divine spark was awakening. They called this process the restoration of the pleroma, the fullness, the return of scattered light to its source, and they mapped it through the body, up the central axis, through what they metaphorically described as inner chambers or seals. If you are enjoying this journey and you want to go deeper into hidden knowledge that the mainstream will never touch, please subscribe to the Gnostic Archive right now and hit the bell, because we are just getting started. And what is coming next will change the way you understand your own body forever. Now let us talk about the cross itself. The vertical beam of the cross of light, in Gnostic understanding, represents the axis of ascension within the human body. It is the great inner channel that runs from the lowest point of your being to the highest. The early Christian mystics, long before the Church consolidated its power, called this the path of the pneumatic soul, the soul that was awakening from matter into light. The horizontal beam represents something equally profound. It represents the expansion of awareness outward from the center, the movement from the personal self into the universal, from I into all. When these two movements meet, the upward and the outward, you get a cross, not a cross of death, a cross of integration, of wholeness. And Jesus, in the Acts of John, explicitly says, the cross of light. I have called for your sake, sometimes word, sometimes mind, sometimes Jesus, sometimes Christ. He is not speaking of himself as a person. He is speaking of a principle, a living principle that moves through existence, through you. Let me take you now into something rarely discussed, even in esoteric circles. The Gnostic teachers were not casual mystics spinning poetic metaphors. Many of them, particularly those in the Valentinian and Sethian traditions, had systems of practice, initiatory rites, contemplative disciplines, forms of inner work designed to alter the quality of consciousness in measurable experiential ways. The Apocryphon of John, one of the greatest surviving Gnostic texts, discovered at Nag Hammadi in Egypt in 1945, describes the creation of the human body as a deliberate act by lower cosmic forces called the archons. These forces, in the Gnostic cosmology, built the body to be a kind of cage, dense, slow, bound to matter. But they made one critical error. They accidentally trapped inside it a fragment of the highest light, the divine spark. And that spark, the Gnostics teach, remembers where it came from, and it wants to go back. This is the great metaphysical drama of the Gnostic tradition. And Jesus, in this tradition, is not simply a savior who takes your punishment. He is a revealer, a bringer of Gnosis, who comes to show the spark inside you that it is not trapped, that it was never really trapped, that the very architecture of your being contains a doorway, and the cross of light is the symbol of that doorway. The vertical, the inner path upward through the deepening of awareness. The horizontal, the inner path outward through the dissolution of the boundaries of self. When both paths are walked simultaneously, this is what the Gnostics meant by ascension, not leaving the body, but transforming within it. Now let us look at something that most people miss entirely. In the Gospel of Thomas, a text that was hidden for nearly 2,000 years and rediscovered as part of the Nag Hammadi library, Jesus says something startling. He says, if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. And if you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. Read that again slowly. This is not a statement about morality. This is a statement about biology, about consciousness, about what happens inside a human being when the inner light is suppressed versus when it is allowed to rise. Because the Gnostics understood something that modern science is only beginning to approach, that consciousness and the body are not separate systems. They interpenetrate, they speak to each other constantly, and the state of one directly shapes the state of the other. The ancient world had many names for what the Gnostics called the divine spark. The Egyptians called it the Ba, the Hindus called it Atman, the Zoroastrians called it the Fravashi. Each tradition mapped its own version of the same interior geography. The inner fire that rises, the inner light that expands, the inner silence that when entered deeply enough opens into something vast and boundless. And across all these traditions, the teachers who had walked that inner path, who had truly crossed from ordinary consciousness into what the Gnostics would call Gnosis, all described remarkably similar things: a sense of vast spaciousness within the body, a quality of stillness that vibrated with aliveness, a recognition, not a belief, but a direct knowing that consciousness is not produced by the body. It flows through it. Jesus, in the Gnostic tradition, was the master of this territory. He did not simply possess the divine spark. He had fully realized it. He had walked the entire vertical axis, from the densest experience of matter to the highest reaches of the pleroma, the divine fullness, and he had walked the horizontal axis, dissolving the boundary between self and other until what remained was pure, undivided awareness. This is what the Gnostics meant when they called him the Christ. Not a title of kingship, a title of completion, of full biological and spiritual integration. And they believed that what he had done, any pneumatic soul, any truly awakened seeker, could do as well. This is the teaching that threatened empires. Because, let me be very direct with you now, if the cross of light is a symbol of inner completion, of the human being discovering its own divinity through direct interior experience, then it does not need an institution to mediate it. It does not need a priest. It does not need an emperor's approval. It does not need a council of bishops meeting in Nicaea in 325 CE to decide which texts are sacred and which are to be burned. The Gnostic path at its heart is a path of direct access. The spark inside you does not need permission to awaken. And this was the great threat, not the theology, the implication. In the years following the Council of Nicaea, the newly institutionalized church moved with extraordinary efficiency to consolidate its version of the story. Texts were suppressed, communities were scattered, libraries were burned, and the rich, complex, wildly diverse landscape of early Christian mysticism was reduced, compressed into a single manageable narrative. A narrative centered on obedience, on sin, on the need for external salvation. The interior path was not erased entirely. It went underground, into the mystical orders, into the monastic traditions, into the quiet corners where people still practiced and still experienced and still remembered. But the cross of light, the central symbol of the interior teaching, was replaced by the cross of wood. The symbol of suffering replaced the symbol of transformation. Please take a moment right now to like this video. It genuinely helps this knowledge reach the people who are ready for it. Because there are seekers watching right now who have been looking for exactly this, and your simple action can put this in front of them. Let us go deeper now, into the body itself. The Gnostics, particularly in the Valentinian school, described the human being as composed of three fundamental aspects. They called them the hylic, the psychic, and the pneumatic. The hylic is the material dimension, the physical body, the senses, the drives and appetites of ordinary survival. The psychic is the soul dimension, the realm of emotion, thought, personal identity, moral awareness. And the pneumatic is the spirit dimension, the deepest level of being, where the divine spark lives in its original purity. Most human beings, the Gnostics taught, live almost entirely in the hylic and psychic dimensions. They are real, they are not evil, but they are not the whole story. The pneumatic dimension is present in every person, but in most it lies dormant, sleeping beneath layers of conditioning, fear, desire, and distraction. Like a seed beneath winter soil, it is alive, but it has not yet broken open. The cross of light, in this framework, is the map of awakening across all three dimensions simultaneously. The vertical axis, ascending through the hylic into the psychic, into the pneumatic, is the path of deepening, of moving inward and upward through layers of being, until you reach the place where the divine spark burns without obstruction. And the horizontal axis, expanding from personal identity into universal awareness, is the path of dissolution, of allowing the boundaries that separate you from everything else to become transparent, to become permeable, until what you call I becomes so vast and so still that it includes everything without grasping anything. When both movements happen together, this is what the texts call the bridal chamber, one of the most sacred metaphors in all of Gnostic mysticism, the union of the ascending soul with the divine light, not in death, in life, in the body, right now. The Gospel of Philip, another Nag Hammadi treasure, speaks of the bridal chamber as the ultimate mystery. It says, the world came about through a mistake, but the bridal chamber is the restoration, the return to the original wholeness that existed before the world of matter and time. And it describes this not as an event that happens after you die. It describes it as an inner event, an interior awakening that can happen in any moment of true stillness, true presence, true gnosis. This is the biological ascension the Gnostics were pointing to, not the lifting of the body into the sky, the lifting of consciousness through the interior architecture of the body into its own luminous source. And Jesus, in the Gnostic tradition, demonstrated this fully. Every moment of his ministry, read through Gnostic eyes, is a teaching about this inner process. When he goes into the desert for 40 days, he is entering the deepest silence of the Hylic dimension, stripping it down, burning through it. When he is transfigured on the mountain, 3 disciples see his body radiate light. This is the pneumatic dimension becoming visible through the psychic and Hylic. The inner fire breaking the surface, momentarily undisguised. And when he speaks of the kingdom of heaven as something within you, not above you, not after death, not in a building, he is describing the pleroma, the divine fullness, already present, already alive, waiting only for the turn of attention inward to be recognized. Now let me bring this forward into your life, because this is not ancient history. This is happening inside you right now. Every time you feel a moment of deep stillness, that unexpected peace that comes when you are by yourself in nature, or at the edge of sleep, or in a moment of genuine wonder, that is the pneumatic dimension touching the surface of your awareness. Every time you feel that something in you is watching your thoughts without being your thoughts, that is the divine spark becoming conscious of itself. Every time you feel simultaneously very small and very vast, both intimately personal and boundlessly open, that is the cross of light activating in you. The vertical and the horizontal meeting at the center, at the heart. The Gnostic teachers did not hand out maps to everyone. They were careful, they tested, they initiated gradually, because they understood that the inner fire, when awakened too suddenly or without proper grounding, can be disorienting. The light, when it first breaks through layers of conditioned identity, can feel terrifying before it feels liberating. The dissolution of the false self is not always comfortable. The Hylic dimension does not let go easily. The psychic dimension, the personality, the story of who you think you are resists its own transparency. This is why Jesus spoke in parables, not to confuse, to calibrate, to give each person exactly as much light as they could receive in that moment, and to plant seeds in the rest, seeds that would germinate slowly, over years, over lifetimes, until the moment of readiness arrived. Subscribe to the Gnostic Archive if you want to keep walking this path. Every episode we release goes deeper into the hidden architecture of the teachings that were buried, and we release them for the seekers, for you, for the ones who knew something was missing from the official story. Let us return now to the Acts of John, to that extraordinary scene, the disciples moving in a circle in the darkness, Jesus at the center, speaking of the cross of light. Imagine the atmosphere, the night before everything changes. These people have walked with this man. They have heard him speak to crowds, and they have heard him speak in whispers. They have seen things they have no language for. And now, in this final intimate hour, he is giving them something different. Not a commandment, not a prophecy, a mystery. He says to them, I am a lamp to you who see me. I am a mirror to you who perceive me. I am a door to you who knock upon me. I am a way to you who are passing. And then he speaks of the cross, and he says that what the world will see tomorrow, the suffering, the wood, the nails, is not the truth of what is happening. The outer cross is a symbol, the inner cross is the reality. This distinction is everything. Because the Gnostics were not dismissing the suffering of Jesus, they were pointing past it to its deeper meaning. The descent into the most extreme density of human experience, the body in agony, the self stripped of everything, and the luminosity that does not go out even there. This, they said, is the teaching, not that suffering is good, but that the light cannot be extinguished by suffering, that the divine spark persists through the darkest passage, that the cross of light is present even in the cross of wood, even there, even then, and here is what they said happened after. Not the resurrection of a physical corpse, though they did not deny the experience of the disciples, but the reappearance of Jesus in a body of light, a luminous form, transparent, unbound by the ordinary rules of matter. This, the Gnostics said, was not a miracle from outside. This was the natural consequence of a fully realized pneumatic consciousness. When the divine spark is fully uncovered, when the cross of light is fully activated across all dimensions of the human being, the body of light is not a future event. It is the present reality beneath the surface reality, always already there, waiting only to be seen. There is a Coptic text barely known, barely studied in mainstream circles, called the Pistis Sophia. It describes lengthy conversations between the risen Jesus and his disciples, including Mary Magdalene, who speaks with an authority and clarity that the male disciples struggle to match. And in these conversations, Jesus describes the inner journey of the soul in extraordinary detail. He speaks of the fate, the system of unconscious forces that keep ordinary human beings locked in repetitive patterns of thought, feeling, and behavior. He speaks of the light powers, interior qualities of awareness that can dissolve those patterns when consciously cultivated. And he describes the ascent of the pneumatic soul through what he calls the treasury of light, step by step, chamber by chamber, seal by seal. Each step corresponds to a deeper release of what is not essential, a deeper resting in what is. This is the biological ascension, not a metaphor. A description of the actual experiential journey that a human being undertakes when they turn their full attention inward and refuse to look away. We are nearly at the end of our time together today. But before we part, I want to leave you with something. Not a conclusion, not a summary. A question to carry. The cross of light is inside you right now. The vertical axis, the possibility of deepening, of going inward, of touching the silence beneath the noise of your life. It is available to you in this moment. The horizontal axis, the possibility of expansion, of releasing the tight grip of the personal self, of allowing the boundaries between you and the sacred to become transparent. It is available to you in this moment. Jesus, in the Gnostic tradition, was not showing you what he alone could do. He was showing you what the human form, your form, is capable of. He was walking the cross of light fully, publicly, in front of witnesses, so that something in those witnesses, and in everyone who would later receive these teachings, would recognize it, would remember, would feel the echo of that light in their own interior. And the question is not whether you believe this. Belief is a psychic function. The question is whether you have ever, even for a moment, felt the truth of it from the inside. Because if you have even once, even for a fraction of a second, then you already know what the Gnostics were pointing to. You already know what Jesus was demonstrating. And that knowing is not something anyone can take from you. Not a council, not a creed, not 2,000 years of institutional forgetting. The cross of light does not require your agreement to exist. It requires only your attention, turned inward, in stillness, in readiness, right now. That is where the kingdom lives. That is where it has always lived. Not in the past, not in the afterlife, here, in you. Waiting, as it has always been waiting, for you to remember that it was never lost. Door,